Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Coaching Call podcast. On this podcast, we'll cover various types of coaching by trainers in sports, martial arts, fitness, and business. We'll discuss each coach's methods to getting the most out of their respective athletes or clients and how they attempt to change the platform in which they coach. Join us on a fun adventure as we discuss unique coaching styles. Coaching is a universal part of how we get others to get something done. Join your host, Raphael, and his guests on this unique journey in coaching.
Hi, I'm Sifu Raphael, and this is the Coaching Call podcast. If you enjoy this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. This episode was made possible by listeners like you. George, thank you for joining me this morning. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me, Sifu. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. So we want to, the way this show works is we get to know who you are as a person. So we go way back when you were like a little guy. Where'd you grow up? Who influenced you even before the age of 10? And then we can go from there, my friend.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Sounds good.
Where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up in a small town called Seal Beach in Orange County, California.
Mm.
I was a middle child. I had an older sister, a younger sister. And as a kid, I just remember having a more or less normal childhood. I did crazy things. I got in trouble. I continued to experiment. I was interested in science from a very young age. And when I was in junior high school, I read quite a bit of science books that had all the mathematics taken out. So I was reading books in junior high school about particle physics and relativity and quantum mechanics. And that stuff fascinated me.
Wow.
And so when I kind of battled my way through high school without getting kicked out or arrested, I decided to major in physics when I went to college. And that just I didn't make that decision because I had a specific outcome that I wanted. I didn't want to become a scientist. I just knew that I was supposed to go to college. And I just chose physics because that was the major that I thought that I would enjoy the most. And even when I was halfway through my major, my friends would ask me, "What are you going to do with a degree in physics?" And I would tell them honestly, I have no idea. So my early career as a human wasn't really filled with any kind of strong choices or strong intentions. I just kind of stumbled around in the direction that I thought would be the most enjoyable for me.
Mm.
As far as childhood role models and mentors, I didn't really have any specifically that came to mind other than my dad. And that was just the kind of when you're a kid, you're kind of genetically programmed to copy whatever the parents around you do. So I copied my parents for better, for worse, whatever kinds of stuff I learned from them. But I didn't really start getting into mentors and recognizing that some people older and more experienced than me would be helpful to me and some wouldn't be so much. And that kind of came in my early career when I graduated college and I started to work in the medical device industry.
Mm. So it's fascinating that you went into something that you didn't even know what you were going to do with it.
Right.
And you said your dad was an influence on you?
Well, he was in that I find myself as an adult and as a young adult copying some of the traits. So that influence was, I think, not anything that I consciously decided I wanted to be like. It was just things that I started to naturally do that I noticed was similar to things he would do. So I think that kind of thing is kind of programmed into us from an evolutionary standpoint. Is when you're little kids, you just naturally copy the adults around you, whether you want to or not.
Right, exactly. When you went to college, you chose physics.
Right.
Was there anything else that interested you, or you're like,
I
well, I'll just
do
do this?
remember one time when I was about halfway through college, and as I mentioned, when I was in junior high school, I read quite a few books that had taken the math taken out of them.
Mm,
And the first couple of years in college, I was taking lower division classes in physics that had really basic math like algebra and stuff. But once you hit calculus, then the math gets really, really complicated. And
mhm.
so I was having a lot of trouble with these upper division physics classes. And that's when I kind of started to wonder if maybe I wasn't cut out to be a physicist or a scientist. And I started to wonder what other major I could decide to choose. And the one that I would have chosen that I didn't choose would have been to major in English so that I could become a writer.
Mm,
That's kind of one of the other things that I would like to have done, or I remember having that idea that if this doesn't work out, I can try writing for a living. And that was something that I kind of toyed with mentally, but it wasn't really something that I considered seriously. I
mm.
wanted to kind of grind my way through and not kind of give up.
Very interesting, and you've written some books already, so
Yeah, yeah, I've written
kinda
a lot of books.
interesting. How
So I
many
ended
books
up
would
doing
you
that
say?
anyways. I took a very circuitous route to my short career as a novelist.
How many books have you written so far?
Of nonfiction, I think I've written about 80 or so.
Wow,
Fiction, I've written 30, 35 maybe.
holy cannoli. That's a lot of, writing for somebody who didn't even think that they would become a writer,
Yeah,
right?
you're absolutely right. I've always actually been good as a writer, not meaning that I write stuff that's good. It's that I've been good at the physical process of sitting down and turning my thoughts into streams of words on a page that seem to have some kind of grammatical coherence to them. Whether that's decent stuff or not is another issue, but I've always been able to sit down and just write out something very, very quickly. I remember when I was in junior high school, my parents got one of the first Apple computers way back then.
Mm,
It was an Apple IIe or something before they came out with Macintosh, and I would sit in my mom's kind of hobby room that was also the computer room, and I would get this extra long headphone cord that I would listen to my record player, and I would just write reports for school, and I would kind of be listening to music, looking at an article in the magazine that I was kind of using as a template, and it was always very easy for me to just write and just make stuff come out, and I would usually get like a B minus or something, but
mm,
just writing a bunch of content was something that I've always been really, really good at.
mm. So what was your first book?
The very first book I wrote was called Zapotec, which is a fiction, and it was kind of like a crime, supernatural fiction kind of thing. And
Mm,
I was really, really since that was the first book I ever wrote, I didn't really know what I was doing. I spent a lot of time. It took me a year to write that,
mm,
and then another maybe 6 months or so to edit it and put the stuff together again. This was before Kindle.
right.
And so it took another year trying to find an agent. And then the next book that I wrote after that, I wrote much more quickly. I don't think I even published the next book I wrote after that. The next book I wrote after that was another fiction book called Swarm Theory, I think, kind of a mathematical based thriller.
Mm,
But then I started to write a blog, and the blog turned into longer and longer blog posts, and the blog posts that were the most popular, those turned into books, and then I just kind of rolled from there. And so I kind of wrote my first 2 books, one published, one not published, were fiction, and then I started writing a lot on a blog, and that turned into nonfiction books, and then I don't
mm,
know how many years later, maybe 4 or 5 years later, then I took a break from nonfiction and wrote a whole bunch of fiction books.
mm.
And by the time I got to the writing the fiction books, I was much more my daily grind was much more fine tuned, so I was much more efficient in my daily writing.
So what's the fastest book you've ever written, and how long was it?
Well, when I wrote novels, I had a very, very consistent schedule that I stuck to. And I wrote novels based on a template that was based on the hero's journey structure, which is a very common story structure that you'll find in a
Mm,
lot of fiction, modern fiction, ancient fiction,
right.
mythology. And it's a 44 chapter structure.
Mm,
And I would write 4 chapters a day,
wow.
and then I would spend 2 or 3 days. I would take the finished book, and then I would send it off to an editor. She would edit it, and then in the next 3 days, I would kind of game out my next novel. And so
Mm,
for about a year, year and a half, I was writing a novel every 2 weeks, and
no
when they were
way.
all the same structure, and the novels ended up being each chapter was about 1,500 words, so 11 chapters times 1,500 words, or 44 chapters, 1,500 words, you're gonna look
Mm,
it up to like 50,000 words, which is I think the minimum considered to be an actual novel is 40,000 words. So I was writing
right.
maybe 50,000 word novels every 2 weeks.
That's incredible. That's incredible. What what bug did you get that you say, "I have to do this every 2 weeks?"
You know, I don't really think of it as getting a specific bug where I got something in my brain. It was just something that this was back when the very first, not the very first, but the very first later Star Wars was coming out.
Mm.
And so when I was working on the first book, I would ride my bicycle from where I lived in Japan. This was all happening when I lived in Japan, down to the
Mm.
library where I would bring my laptop and just, practice and game out and think of all the plot points and everything. And I would pass by the movie theater, and the movie theater was playing the music from Star Wars, the very first Star Wars, that da na na
Mm.
na da
Right,
na
right.
da na na, and I would hear that and would remind me of the Star Wars movie, which was an example of the hero's journey. Because when George Lucas made the first Star Wars, he hired Joseph Campbell, the
Mm.
guy who essentially discovered the monomyth for the hero's journey, and he wrote a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. So that kind of motivated me to dig into the hero's journey process. And so
Uh-huh.
that's probably where the bug came from, because every time I went through writing a story, it was kind of like the same experience you have watching a really well written movie that
Mm.
goes through the hero's journey process, but it was my own creation, so it felt a lot more kind of compelling and motivating. So it was just a fantastic, enjoyable process. And so it wasn't really, I guess that's the best answer to your question. That was the kind of bug that I caught. But I remember
Mm.
very specifically riding to the library, passing by the movie theater and hearing that da na 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 da na da na. It was like I was on my own hero's journey to write stories about other people's hero's journeys.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. And you said you were in Japan. Talk to us how that even happened. What was the journey like, if you will, hero's journey to going into Japan? And you
Well,
went there
like
for what reason?
Like I mentioned before, when I was going through school, I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up, and so I just did whatever seemed natural. And when I finished with a degree in physics, I just did what every other kid did, was to just start sending out a whole bunch of resumes and hope
Mm.
for the best. And I ended up working at a company. It was a big, huge biomedical company. And this is probably when I met one of my first mentors, this boss that I had that gave me all this advice on how to, work the company. And one of the things he gave me advice was to put all of the money I could into the stock purchase plan. And I
Mm.
didn't even know what the stock market was. So I just did whatever he told me.
Right.
And I worked there for 10 years. And during the 10 years that I worked there, this was back during the 90s, from 90 to 2000, when the NASDAQ was essentially, the entire NASDAQ was at like a 45-degree angle going up.
Mm.
And so the average return on our company's stock during that time, that I was putting everything that I could, maxing out my contributions to the stock plan, was 36%.
Mm.
So I earned 36% of my investments that I didn't even know what I was doing. Just kind of luckily stumbled into that. But then in 2000, the company moved from California to Minnesota.
Mm.
And because I was one of the key employees, they said, "You got to come to Minnesota." And I said, "I don't know if I want to," because I had this huge sack of cash that just kind of magically appeared over the years. And I thought to myself, I could go to Minnesota and continue working and leave California, or I could take a couple years off. And so I decided to take a couple years off.
Mm.
And that's when I learned all about NLP and conversational hypnosis and the stuff that I do now. But then after 4 years of 2 years taking off, I ran out of money. And it turns out that if you have a job that's highly technical, you can't just nope out of the job market for a couple of years and then jump right back in. You kind of
Mm.
lose your place.
Right.
And so I found that, and I started kind of looking around for ways to make a living. And during that time that I took off, I did a lot of traveling. I went to a lot of Asian countries. I went to Belize. I took a lot of seminars. I took a lot of college classes. And that's when I found out that you can make a living as an English teacher. And so I
Mm.
researched all the different countries where you can go and teach English, and the economically most advantageous countries are generally in East Asia: Japan, Korea, Taiwan, based on what they pay you, based on the relative living conditions, based on the local economy. And so I went to Korea for a year, I went to Taiwan for a year, and I went to Japan. And the plan was to go to Japan for a year and write a novel, which is what I did. That's when I wrote my first novel. And
Mm.
I was thinking, as dumbly as I did, that I would write a novel, become super famous, become super rich, and live happily ever after. But it didn't quite
Right.
work out that way.
Mm.
So I ended up staying in Japan for about 12 years rather than 1 year.
Mm.
And so that's when I spent all my time kind of going through my own kind of hero's journey as a writer, and coming up with all these ideas and how to write books on NLP and stuff. And that's so I spent a lot of time in Japan trying to write myself into a different career rather than having to go back into the tech field.
Mm. You know, what I'm thinking is that you're in a foreign country. It's the language is definitely different,
Yeah.
and you get into NLP, which is all
Mhm.
about words, language, right?
Right.
Um, when you're teaching English
Mhm.
and you're seeing the different culture, it definitely is doing something, I guess, to your brain, if you will, because you kind of start to think a little bit differently. Am I right there, or am I a little bit off?
It kind of depends on the person, I would say. When I first went there are these in NLP, they have these things called meta programs. And
Hmm.
these are kind of these structural filters that everybody has through which we see the world. And one of the meta programs is, do you tend to sort for differences when you go into a new situation, or do you tend to sort for similarities when you go into a new situation? And because I had already spent a year in Korea and Taiwan, when I got to Japan, at first it was kind of cool because it was all different, but the longer I stayed there, the more I realized that beneath culture and
Hmm.
language, we're really the same inside. We still have the same fears and desires, and people still complain about the same things. They just talk about it using different words and they express it
Hmm.
using different culture, but it's really kind of the same thing. So the longer I stayed there, the more I felt like this is just a place like any other place.
Mm.
But one thing I did notice when I lived there is I got really, really good at reading people's body language,
Really?
because it's kind of like in the movies where you have this kind of a like a kung fu guy who goes blind, then he has all these extra skills like Daredevil and stuff. It's kind of like that. When you close off one sense, your other senses have to
Hmm.
kind of increase to make up to compensate for it. And so I would find myself in these situations, and all the people around me were speaking Japanese, and I couldn't understand what they were saying unless I paid close attention to what they were saying. And that meant that I was forced to kind of soak in all their facial expressions and body language, and I kind of developed this interesting conversational style when I was talking to these one-on-one customers that I was teaching English to. And I would have to talk to them, and while I was talking, I would have to simultaneously read their facial expressions and kind of decide if I used a few vocabulary words that they didn't understand. Then I
Right.
would have to kind of back up and rephrase itself until their facial expressions went back into the understanding state.
Sorry about that.
That's right.
Go ahead. You were saying.
And so this is kind of something that I don't think I ever would have learned otherwise, because most of the time when we're having a conversation, we're not really paying that much attention to the person we're talking to. We're paying attention to what's going on in our own head. And so this
Hmm.
kind of forced me to pay attention to people while I'm talking, while I'm listening to things that you don't normally pay attention to. And so that, aside from any kind of cultural changes, is more of a language or more of a kind of a sensory deprivation change that forces the other senses to wake up, kind of thing.
Mm. I'm enjoying this because it shows that we truly had to pay attention
Yeah.
to the person you were with, right? And a lot of people miss that point.
Mhm.
And you could both be speaking the same language,
Right.
but we don't pay attention. And you said it, because we're in our own head,
Right.
not in the space of the moment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're not fully engaged in the conversation. And that's a skill, I believe, that basically you have, but so many people lack.
Yeah. Well, it's a skill that so many people lack because I think on a fundamental level, we don't really learn skills until we're or unless we're forced to,
Mm,
or unless we have some very, very strong specific outcome in the future, which not a lot of people have. But like you said, most of us, when we're in a conversation, even when we're not talking, we're kind of in our head trying to figure out what we're going to say when the other person gets done talking.
mhm,
But if you're going to be in persuasion and influence and sales, like I write books on how to do, the better you can pay attention to the other person, the easier it is to convince them to do whatever you want them to do.
mhm.
And
And it almost
from
seems
a
like it's their idea, right?
yeah, exactly. That's one of my favorite lines or ideas from Dale Carnegie is, you can get anybody to do anything so long as they believe it was their idea.
Mhm,
And if you're in your own head, if you're expressing your ideas through your own ego, it's never going to be their idea. It's always going to be your idea. in
Mhm.
which you always have this kind of opinion frame battle going, even in casual conversations.
Yeah.
Oh, your idea
Yeah.
is interesting, but my idea is much, much better because of this thing. And your insight is better, but my idea, well, yeah, but what about this idea? But the real question is, what about this over here?
Mhm.
It's
Yeah,
just a
yeah,
never-ending battle.
it is. It's very interesting that the more we talk, the more I'm seeing like the difference between an amazing salesperson and somebody who's just struggling
Right,
and they don't
right.
get it. They don't understand. I think somebody who's an amazing salesperson is somebody who truly pays attention to the other person
Yeah,
and
exactly.
allows them to understand the concepts and the ideas in order to be able to get them to facilitate what they want, right?
Right, right. Yeah, you're familiar with the idea of the halo effect?
Mhm.
That attractive people say normal things, but these normal things get boosted up because of their super attractiveness.
Yeah.
When you turn off your own ego and you forget about what you think should happen and you focus on the other person's desires, what they're after, because every time someone is in a situation where they're just thinking about buying something, they have some kind of unmet desire in their brain. And if you focus on that unmet desire and kind of build that out from within the other person, they'll start to see everything about you and what you're selling through their own kind of custom built halo effect, because now
Mhm.
they have this big huge sphere of desires, and most people don't have a lot of experience getting very far with expressing what it is we want, because we're almost always met with another ego idea from the other person we talk to.
Mm.
It's almost like Newton's third law that says every body in motion tends to stay in motion. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Every expression of the ego based desire has an equal and opposite ego based desire from the other person. But if you just turn off your ego desire and let the other person build up, they'll eventually just sell themselves on whatever it is you want them to buy.
Mhm. Mhm. It's so interesting, this conversation, and thank you for being here with me because you said one of the things that um about how you had to pay attention to their facial expressions because
Right.
maybe the words you were using they were not understanding or
Hmm.
comprehending.
Hmm.
And it's very interesting. I work with children and I work with young adults and even older people. And it's the shy ones that teach me the most. It's the ones
Hmm.
that barely speak.
Right. Right.
Even if they could be 88 years old and they talk in a very low monotone voice. And that it's almost like I need to read your lips. I need to
Hmm.
read your
Right.
reactions. And sometimes it's, do they even understand what I'm saying?
Right.
Right? So
Right.
it's that comprehension that we have to go through, and I think they're the ones that teach me the most because
Hmm.
you're right, we have to read them, right?
Right. You're forced to actually come into what they call an NLP uptime, where you're 100% out of your head and 100% focusing on what's happening in front of you.
Mhm.
And I've taught a lot of kids in Japan, and a lot of kids are super hyper, and you don't really have to do a lot except be like a goofy
Right.
clown and they'll respond. But like you said, the kids that taught me the most are the quiet ones. And I've
Mhm.
had a lot of private lessons with the kids, and you reminded me of this one kid that came with her mom, and apparently her mom wanted her to study English and she didn't want to, so she came to the school. And as soon as her mom left, she started to cry, and
Oh,
I had to
wow.
go into this room with her by myself, and all the other teachers like, "Oh, are you gonna be okay? She's gonna cry." I'm like, "No, no, no, I got this." So I just kind of laid back as much as I could. I leaned back and I just started asking her questions in my own kind of crappy basic Japanese. And finally, after about 10, 20 minutes, I got her to slowly open up and we had a great time. So it's like you said, the people that force you to kind of stretch yourself outside of what you're normally used to doing, that's where you learn the most.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I've been told 2 things. I'm not trying to toot my horn, but I think, and it's because of that, is that I've been told that I can sell ice to Eskimos,
Hmm.
and the other one is that I've been called a Pied Piper because I get kids to react,
Yeah.
act,
Yeah.
and do what I can have the kids laughing and going crazy, and the next minute they're I get attention and they're
Yeah.
focused and they're doing something. And I think it's because I'm not at my level. I come down to whatever
Hmm.
level they're at so that we can communicate, so we can have that openness, if you will.
Right,
because a
right,
lot of
right.
kids also, we're tall, right? And they look at us as like, who is that giant up
Yeah.
there? And we forget that we have to come down.
Mhm.
I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of really great orators or public speakers don't use words that would confuse someone. So they
Mhm.
use a fifth or sixth grade reading level
Yeah,
of
exactly. Right, right,
words
right.
in order to be able to communicate to the masses, right?
Mhm.
Because everybody can understand a fifth grader, right?
Mhm.
Or the words that they use. But if we go a lot higher, you're going to lose some people, right?
Mhm. Right, right. Yeah, those are fundamental concepts from sales and copywriting is to create rapport, and people hear that word all the time, and so it seems like something that
Mm,
we, "Oh, yeah, I know all about rapport." But you really have to in order to create rapport, you have to really enter the world of the person you're talking to, like, not just pretend to, but literally enter the world so you're on their same level, so you're speaking
mhm,
the same language.
right.
There's a quote from, I think it's Sugarman, who's a famous copywriter, might be somebody else, but he said, if you're selling a coat to somebody on the street, you don't walk up and just start selling a coat. You walk up and you enter the conversation they're already having. And so
Mm,
similarly, when you sell something to somebody, you have to enter the conversation they're already having in their mind. And if you're teaching a little bunch of little kids, you have to enter that. You have to go to that level and enter into the conversation they're already having in that level, and from there you can lead them.
So you decided to teach English. What made you start learning NLP? Was it the fact that you wanted to understand better? What
Well,
was your reason?
I'm not gonna lie, I don't really have a noble reason for studying NLP. When I first went to Japan, I met this guy there, and this guy was just an absolute natural with the ladies.
Mm.
He had so much charisma. He would just talk to ladies and they would just swoon over him. And he said, George, you should study NLP. And I said, NL what? And he said, that's where I learned to do all this stuff. And so I said, sign me up, man. And I've kind of been learning and practicing and researching and inventing different types of that type of communication ever since. That was like my first, maybe, I don't want to call this a red pill experience or a kid in a candy shop experience, but that really just opened my eyes to what was possible.
Mm,
And so I've been to a lot of NLP seminars. I've read tons of NLP books. It's just how you communicate. And I kind of brought my scientific understanding or my scientific curiosity into the structure of language and human language and how the words you use can have a huge impact on the
mm,
people you're talking to. And so I just got way, way mesmerized by the whole concept of NLP. And the first application I tried with NLP was I started to hire myself as a copywriter. And the idea was the better you can use your words to convince people, the more money you can make. And that was kind of the perfect training ground because the
mhm,
better you do, the better your results are, like instantaneously.
right.
So I did copywriting for a couple of years. And then once I did copywriting for a couple of years, that's when I started my blog and I started kind of writing a blog about NLP. And it just kind of snowballed from there. And it's still to this day snowballing. I'm still kind of thinking about different ways to phrase things and different ways to use these language patterns. And it's like a never ending kind of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory kind of experience.
It's pretty cool when you think about it. Excuse me. When you dive deeper into it, it's definitely trying to understand, isn't it? More not necessarily about you, but about other people. So there's some psychology involved, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Psychology. And one idea is that the words we use are very kind of poor approximation of what we're thinking on the inside.
Mm,
Most people are not nearly as articulate as they wish they could be, and most
mhm,
people don't really have enough clarity of what they actually want than they probably could have. And so the idea is not to use language patterns from the outside in to persuade people or come up with clever language patterns to get them to do things. It's about how to talk to them in a way to help them open up their kind of inner mind and get more clarity on the inside. And that does require a whole lot of understanding of psychology. And that's another thing that I've been fascinated by the past probably 10 years: psychology, economics, and or more deeply, something called praxology, which is the economics of human subjective decision making,
Mm,
and evolutionary psychology, which drives our instincts. And so, if
interesting.
you can understand the external way we express our thoughts, and you combine that with a kind of basic understanding of human nature from a kind of evolutionary psychology standpoint, you can combine those two in some very, very powerful ways.
Mm. It's very, you made me think of when someone says, I can't put it into words,
Right, right,
right?
right,
So
right,
because they can think it, but whatever words they use will not give it credit, right?
right.
It,
Exactly.
it won't, it, the true meaning will not come out, and they may mess it up, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, a lot of mistakes that salespeople make is they ask the customer, "What do you want?
mm,
What's important about what you want? What kind of characteristics would you like to have connected to the thing that you want?" Which usually doesn't work that well, because most people, even when they have an idea that they want to buy a new car, for example, they don't really have a specific idea of why they want to buy the car, what kind of car they want. They just kind of like this, or they have this vague feeling of getting something new.
yeah, I love it. When you actually, going across the screen is your website,
Mm,
mindpersuasion.com/start.
mm.
What does that mean, start? Right?
That's just
That's a word right there.
Well, that's if one thing that I've gotten feedback from on my website is it's really, really huge, and there's all kinds of rabbit holes you can go down. So I came up a few months ago, maybe 6, 8 months ago, with one page that has all of our major links to different products, like Kindle links, and the products on this one platform and
Mm,
products on another platform, and our coaching program, and how you get in touch with me. That's all on that's the start page. So that's kind of a start here kind of thing.
mm.
So from there, you can get all the different places. You can go off and find all the mind persuasion stuff I've put out all over the world over the past 10 years or so.
Very cool. You know, a lot of people don't do that. And one of the things that, like you, when I have my customers, I give them, I even actually, they go on my app, it says start here.
Mhm.
And do you know how many people never open that tab? It's incredible. And
Yeah.
then they're like, well, I couldn't find it. I'm like, okay, let's
Yeah.
review. Let's review.
Well,
How did you start?
I think everyone inside has a couple of competing mindsets.
Mm,
One is we all like to be the child like discovery treasure hunter, where we kind of look around wherever we want to. The other
mm,
half likes to be told exactly what to do. And these are almost
mm.
always in conflict, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but it's very so
It's frustrating. It's frustrating.
how do I change that? You know, when I tell people, you know, they have a couple of tabs, right? I'm not talking about a website. I'm talking about an actual app that
Mm.
they downloaded, they have, they're my customers, and I want them. So what would be a better word besides start here? Or how about don't go here?
Don't click. Yeah, if you
No.
put "don't click," that's what they'll click on.
Yeah.
Or reserved for high level people, or something like that.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
Reserved for however much space you have.
Yeah.
This space is reserved, or
Mm,
reserved
yeah.
VIP only, or something like that. Something that
VIP
sounds
only.
exclusive. Don't come here.
Of course, everybody wants to know, "What is that?" Right? So,
Yeah,
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 I think I like that idea because when you make it too simple
yeah,
and, you know, you give explicit directions of where to go,
yeah.
and you said people wanna explore on their own. They don't wanna be told what to do,
Right.
right? So it's very interesting. So I
Yes.
may have to have 2 tabs and they all lead to the same place.
Right, right.
One is the instructions and the other one is don't do it.
Yeah. One one trigger that drives sales is curiosity. And there was a study they did, this is in one of the copywriting books I read, where they compared two different colors of orange
Mm,
crayons. I don't know how they did this. It was in some shop where they had two color crayons, and one was called tangerine orange, and the other was called millennial orange or millennium orange. And this was back
Mm.
way back during 2000. And the millennium orange outsold the tangerine orange by like 2 to 1.
Wow.
Because you look at the tangerine orange, is okay. I know what it's called. It's called tangerine because that's the name of an orange. But millennium orange, why is it called millennium orange? That somehow created more interest in that crayon, and that's what the one people bought because I want to know this thing that I don't understand.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
almost as if we have this instinct that makes us go towards stuff that's not clear and that we don't understand, so we can kind of assert our kind of agency over that thing and get an understanding of what it is.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I had a gentleman who does marketing based on all that,
Mhm.
and Felix Ko, if he's listening, he's an amazing individual. What he did is he said somebody was having trouble with their ad. He goes, huh, let's put the fork. It was for a restaurant. He goes, let's put the fork on the other side.
Mm.
It They got 20% more business
Wow.
just for that one little thing.
Yeah.
20% more just by putting the fork on the other side of they redid the picture and they just put the fork on the other side. And it was because that's where people's eyes look, right?
Mm.
It's all about the colors and all these different things. So when you work with someone, how do you help and guide them as a coach?
Well, the first thing I do is try to get them to build up their internal mental map, so to speak, of what it is they want.
Mm,
And the two main important things to start with is what do you want and why haven't you gotten it yet? If you're clear on what you want, what's stopping you? What are the internal obstacles? And
mm,
that can kind of take a while to find out what the internal obstacles are, because a lot of people have an idea of what they want, and what they think is stopping them is not really what's truly stopping them. It's something that they've kind of projected out into the world.
mm,
And what's truly stopping them is, in the case of sales or talking to girls, it's all about overcoming internal mental blocks. Because if you compare something like practicing the guitar
mhm,
versus practicing social skills, practicing the guitar is a lot easier because it's not emotionally dangerous, or it doesn't feel emotionally dangerous. It's boring, but it's not emotionally dangerous. And to the extent people do pay coaches to help them practice the guitar, it's really more so to keep them honest and on point, rather than just because you could really practice the guitar by getting a book and just practicing, and you could tell if you're playing it right or not by listening. But it's
mhm,
not emotionally dangerous, because social skills, whether it be sales or talking to girls, is seems so emotionally damaging. That part of the equation is the most difficult, is finding out what's stopping them. Because once you get past a certain kind of feeling of emotional difficulty, it's really kind of a self-sustaining thing.
mhm,
Because when you're playing the guitar, it's, even though you play a song good, it feels kind of cool. It gets boring pretty quickly. You need to have a very, very strong outcome a couple of months out or weeks out or years out when you want to become a rock star up on stage. But once you get over certain internal emotional hurdles when it comes to social skills, it becomes a self-sustaining kind of idea, because the more you get out there, the more it feels good in the moment. And
mhm,
so the biggest trouble is to kind of help calibrate exactly what it is on the inside that's keeping them from getting what they want.
mm. So I can only imagine that it's the questions that you ask that allows them to open up to you, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. One of the techniques that I developed while I was teaching English was this kind of thing called, they call the either or technique.
Mm,
And this was because a lot of my customers in Japan were engineers and programmers, and they weren't the most extroverted people even in their own language. And when they speak
mm,
English, they become a lot more shy. And so
right.
these are the worst people in the world to expect to be fully articulate with their ideas. So I had to kind of help them bring out what was inside their brain, but I didn't want to put words in their mouth. So I
Mm,
had to do some kind of guessing and say, is it something like this, or is it something like this? Where both choices would have a, or one of the two choices would have 100% chance of being the correct choice. And
mm,
that creates a lot of, or that requires a lot of creative thinking on my part. And so I use the same kind of thing when talking to the client. So when you think about being better in sales, and you think about the thing that might be stopping you, is this more of a fear of what happens from the customer or kind of a feeling you get on the inside? And you
Mm.
kind of start off broad and kind of whittle it down to the core issue. And once we get to the core issue, then we can start doing some internal work to help whittle that core issue down and make it less of an impediment.
Mhm. So going back to that young girl who all the other teachers were afraid that she's just going to cry the whole time that you were in the room with her. It was trust, right? It was trust initially for her to open up to you.
Yeah,
Um,
trust and I think rapport, really. Like you said
mhm,
earlier, you have to get down to their level. I think most people, when they see somebody in that situation, they try to tell them what to do, tell them what to
mm,
do, tell them what to do. But I just turned off my telling part of my ego and just kind of sunk down on my chair. So we were at eye level. I was sitting like this, looking at her, and I just started asking her simple questions in Japanese. Do you like ice cream? Do you like this? Do you like that?
mm,
Until she started to open up. And when she started to open up, I started to open up. And it was just a kind of a very, very slow meet her level and then slowly kind of lead her back out of that kind of closed off internal scared space.
mm. It's like communication 101 to me, right?
Yeah. 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 From an external stand or from a textbook academic standpoint, it's absolutely communication 101, but
Mm,
there's this huge difference between what we should do and what we're actually capable of doing.
mm.
I mean, and according to the textbooks, it's super easy to lose weight and get a six pack and
You're right.
have a healthy body, but actually doing that is a cajillion times harder than just saying it.
Mhm. It's a belief, right? It's a belief if I can, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So NLP, psychology, the words, the thoughts, the ideas, the concepts. That's what really we should all focus on, right? When
mhm,
we speak with someone, so we are in the moment. Because a lot of people right now, I mean, that's one of the biggest things that every coach is, yeah, you got to be in the moment, you got to be in the moment. But I've noticed that some of them are not, right?
yeah. A
They
lot of
say
people.
it.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of statements and phrases and memes and ideas from the self help space that people just repeat over and over and over again without really understanding what they mean.
Mm,
And it's easy to pretend you know what you're talking about because you say the right things and you notice the things that you should say about people, but actually doing those and leading by example is a completely different ballgame.
mhm. So what's the book that you would say you would, if you had to get rid of all the books you've ever written, but you can only keep one, which one would that be?
I would probably, well, that's a tough one.
I'm sure it is.
I
Only
would
one.
probably have to say Verbal Assassin.
Ooh,
It's
that's
a
an excellent
defensive
name.
book. It doesn't sound like buy this book and get a girlfriend or buy this book and make more
Mm,
money. It's targeted to people that want to avoid being manipulated and avoid being taken advantage. But within that book is pretty much all of the core language patterns you need to be able to kind of much better formulate your own ideas.
mm. Verbal Assassin. That's such a cool name. It kind of draws somebody in. It's like, how, ooh, does that mean I'm a verbal assassin or am I avoiding a verbal assassination?
Right, right,
That's
right.
pretty cool. If any of your books, that's the one I would want because it's the one that you picked out. So I would love a copy if possible. And when we consider those two words, right, they have so much meaning behind them,
Mhm.
right? Because it's the words we use, and then it's either we're killing it, right, or we're in a mission.
Right,
Because
right.
for me, an assassin is somebody who's on a mission and they won't stop until they
Yeah,
finalize the
yeah,
mission.
yeah. Movie fictional assassins are always the most badass people you'll ever meet. I mean, they have all kinds of skills. They're super emotional free. They control everything. They don't go off the handle. Everything is calculated
Mm.
and they and
Imagine John Wick in the movie,
yeah, yeah.
right? Or Jason Bourne. When you consider the titles to your books, how do you come up with them? And I mean, that one's, I love that title, by the way. How do you come up with them? Do you write the book first and then the book kind of tells you this is what you should name it?
I usually come up with a basic title at the beginning, and then I
Mm,
usually change it by the time I write the book.
mm,
And the process, I don't, be honest, I don't really put a lot of thought into the title of the book. My whole process is just to keep grinding and keep grinding and keep grinding. I'm afraid if I get stuck on one particular thing and
mhm.
spend too much time thinking about it, it might kind of trip up my workflow.
Right, right. That's why I said maybe you do the book first and then the name comes out of it.
Yeah, yeah,
Because I've had other authors who tell me that's how they've done it. And then some of it maybe they dreamt the title, and then
mm,
from the title is how the book gets written. I mean,
yeah,
everybody has a different
yeah,
concept or
yeah.
idea of how they
Right.
do it, right? So yours is
I usually have a basic kind of a working title that's more of
mm,
a description than a kind of a clickbait title. And
mm,
then I kind of game out the structure of all the chapters, all the processes I want to go through, and I kind of game that up first. So before I start writing, I already have a kind of idea of how the structure and the flow of the book will be.
mm,
And when
very
I'm
cool.
done with that, then I go back and I reevaluate the title and come up with a better sound. And sometimes I use a lot of keyword research tools
Mm,
because when you're selling books on Amazon Kindle, you have to compete by keywords and keyword
right.
phrases. If you come up with a title that sounds cool, but it's not something that people are typing and looking for, you're not gonna no one's gonna find you.
Yeah, exactly. When w- when you were writing novels, you were doing them every 2 weeks. What are you working on now?
Right now, I'm in kind of a transition phase, and for the past 10 years, my website has been passively collecting customers to my email list, and
Mm,
I've been growing small following on social media. And for the past 5 years or so, I've been kind of producing products, books, whatnot on a regular basis. And so right now I'm kind of transitioning from producing content to trying to actively grow a much bigger market.
mm.
And so
So
I'm still
that's
producing content on a daily basis, but I'm doing it not to create stuff to sell, but to put content out there that will hopefully attract a lot more customers.
mm.
And so I'm exploring a lot of things that I haven't really done before, like advertising and how to actually leverage social media. Before I just would kind of put stuff out and hope for the best and not really measure anything. But now I'm taking a much more kind of proactive mindset towards how I can grow a bigger market.
So it's copywriting again, right? It's coming back
Yeah.
at you.
Right. Right. Right.
Can't avoid it. You can't,
Yeah.
especially with social media, right?
Yeah. Well,
How do
every
you capture?
my belief is that every time we communicate, either consciously or unconsciously, we're trying to persuade people.
Mhm,
You can't communicate without having an intention to persuade somebody with with the data you're giving them. And so the better you can persuade people, the better you can copyright yourself, the better you can move people's minds, the better you'll do.
yeah, it reminds me of somebody, 2 guys are standing in a corner, right? And somebody told me this a while ago, and they said, one guy asked a girl, "Hey, you wanna go to s have sex with me? Or you
Mhm.
wanna go to bed with me?" And he gets smacked.
Right.
And then the other guy tries to smooth it out,
Yeah, exactly.
and he gets
Mhm.
no results. But the guy who says it incorrectly, because he's persistent, eventually gets lucky,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's that persistence, right? Even if the words are wrong,
Right.
that sometimes will get somebody to pay attention, right?
Yeah. Well, in the realm of persuasion, I see that as one end of a spectrum. There's this fantastic book called High Probability Selling by Jacques Worth,
Mm,
Werth. And he uses a very bare minimum persuasion technology, so to speak. And his idea is you present your product in about 10 seconds or less and
mm,
ask the customer, is this what you're interested in or not? If they say no, you just move on to the next person. And so this is the be persistent with not quite the correctly calibrated words, but eventually you'll find people that are already almost preset to buy whatever you're selling. And so
Mm,
his theory is kind of like the idea of, and I think he uses this example in the book, is you have a deck of cards. You could spend your time trying to turn each card into an ace by staring at it and use your
right.
Jedi mind powers, or you could just quickly sort through the deck and find the aces. And so whenever you see a group of people, according to the theory, your job is to not try to sell each one of them, but to try to find the people that are almost on the verge of buying already.
Mm,
And that's a
right.
much better way to use your time. On the other side is, I don't know if you've seen that TV show Halton Catch Fire.
No, I have not.
There's one guy on there who is probably the best written fictional stereotypical salesperson. Whenever he speaks in these just flowery metaphors, and he's got this massive charisma. That's kind of the other side of the spectrum, that no matter who you talk to, you're trying to dazzle them with your metaphors and your language
Mm,
and your persuasion technology, and you're trying to sell every single person. So it's really,
interesting.
I think, a matter of personal preference, which method you want to use. The
Yeah.
metaphorical flowery speaker, or the high probability. Is this what you want or not? Next. Is this what you want or not? Next. Is this what you want or not? There's
Uh,
even within, not to interrupt you, but there's a method within the seduction community
mhm.
called the shock and awe opener, and it uses that very same technique. You just walk up to a girl, you say, "Hey, how you going? When you want to go somewhere and have some fun?"
Mm.
No? Okay, next, and try that to somebody else, and do that maybe 100 times per night, and you might get lucky more times than the guy who's using the kind of slow burn, flowery, metaphorical sales
Yeah,
technique.
yeah, yeah. The
That
the
takes a
romantic
lot
guy.
of confidence,
Yes, it does. Uh,
massive confidence, and you have to withstand a lot of potential slaps to the face.
right, right. You gotta turn the other cheek, I guess.
Yeah.
And eventually, you do get lucky. When we consider, when we communicate with loved ones, is there a difference? I mean, I know it, but I'm just curious how you think. When we communicate with people we're trying to bring into our fold.
Mhm. It's the same basic structure. There's two ways that I normally describe any kind of persuasion. There's outside in persuasion, which is you're trying to take ideas in your head and put them into their head. Then there's inside out persuasion, where you turn off your ideas and pull them out. I
Mm,
think one of the problems that comes up in relationships is, if you remember the scene from the Blues Brothers, if you've seen the Blues Brothers, they show up at this bar. They start to tune up their instruments. The waitress gives them each a beer, and they play their set, and they drink a whole bunch of beers. And they assumed, because the first beer was free, that all the other beers were free. And that's when they got in trouble, and they went out to their car. And that's when they said their famous line that it's 106 miles to Chicago, or whatever. But that can happen in a relationship, because we don't often assert ourselves within relationships more so than with strangers, or as much as with strangers. We can start to make assumptions about the other person, and those assumptions about their feeling can get in the way of open and clear communication.
mm. So
Because
that's
a lot
why,
of times we'll swallow our pride, so to speak, swallow our intentions, just to kind of, in the name of relationship harmony, and the other person might misunderstand that as who we actually are, and they'll
mhm,
start to assume that later, and you have two people that are building up these massive assumptions about each other in their mind, and that can get very dangerous later on if you don't ever actually speak up.
mhm. It reminds me of two people who maybe are dating and then they decide to move in together.
Right.
And then
Yeah,
all of a
that's
sudden they're like, "You do what in the morning?"
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Well, go ahead.
ideally, from an evolutionary psychology standpoint, the way we kind of evolved to fall in love and get together with people is, we maybe started out having a kind of mutual one-itis for each other. We have this kind of affinity for each other, but it's based on a very inaccurate idea of who they really are. And
Mm,
ideally, the longer we get to know each other, the longer it takes, the more we kind of recalibrate this idea of who they are versus who they actually are, rather than
mm,
what compared to what we think they are versus how they actually are. And if that goes slow enough, you'll eventually have a union that'll last forever, because you eventually have a really true idea of the way they really are, everything about them.
mm.
And one of the ways to watch this in all of its glorious destruction is that really train wreck show on Netflix they have called Love at First Sight,
I didn't
where
see
they
it.
have they have people. It's a reality show. They have people meet each other without seeing each other, and within a week of talking to each other, the goal of the show is they have to propose to somebody
Mm.
after
Wow.
only knowing them for a week and not seeing them. And then they have all this stuff that happens afterwards that is inevitable that's going to happen. And it's like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
You mean they have to propose without actually seeing the other person also?
Right, right. They have to get to know each other. They're in this two separate rooms. There's a kind of a wall between them. They are in there. They're both presenting their best selves, so they're giving a completely artificial version of who they really are.
Mm.
And because of the structure of the show, the goal is to propose. Otherwise, they get kicked off the show and don't get to be on TV anymore. And then they have to meet each other. Then they have like a month before they get married,
Mm.
and they try to make it as terrifying as possible by bringing on their relatives. And this is just painful to watch sometimes
Oof, I can
because
only
they
imagine.
accelerate their one-itis idea of the best case version of how the other person really is to how they really are in like a 1 month time frame, which is inevitable to lead to
Mm.
all kinds of anger and frustration. And
Right, right. And then also, the eyes, they see something different than
yeah,
the ears do, right? If you will, because you're almost asking them to see through their ears,
right,
right?
right,
What
right.
one of the things that I've always said is that a blind person is not judgmental on skin color
Hmm.
because they don't know if
Right,
you're
right.
light, you're dark, you're
Mhm,
whatever complexion you are, and there's so many different complexions that we all have. They have no idea. They just have
right.
to go on that blind faith, if you will,
Mhm.
right?
Right, right, right.
So one of the things I say, that bigotry probably would not be around if we were all blind.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And
I'm making you think, aren't I?
it would be an interesting. There was actually a movie like that where something happened and everybody on Earth went blind. And how do
Mm,
people deal with that?
mm. Yeah, it's really interesting, and I knew a young lady who her life turned upside down because she had sight and slowly it went away until
Mhm,
she fully went blind, and she lived alone. She had to figure all these different crazy concepts out, and even just how to get to the store, how to do all
mhm,
these different things. And then so now she had to truly rely on the different senses besides
mhm,
her eyes, which she
mhm,
had always relied on. And that's one of the things that when I teach somebody something new, sometimes I make them close their eyes so they can start to feel
right.
what they're going through. And it,
Mhm,
it really, it's really interesting to see. And when I've done it to kids, of course, their parents are there. I want to make sure that's happening. I'm
yeah.
not blindfolding a kid, right, without their parents there. But I've had kids cry,
Wow.
really like hysterical, and then I say, "You don't have to do this. You don't have to do it." But then they turn around and they see the other kids. Well, they're doing it.
Mhm,
Maybe I want to do it. I'm like, you don't have to. And so I build that trust that so you're not going to get hurt. Your mom is here, your dad's here, whoever's here. We're all here. We just want to see how you feel and without your eyes wandering.
mhm,
And it really, especially for children, it really what a dynamic it has for them because all of a sudden it's that trust. Right?
mhm,
Even trust in moving because I'll have
mhm,
them do movements and it's so incredible. And all of a sudden, because your balance goes a little bit, you're not sure of your next step. All these
mhm,
different things start to happen, and it's really interesting that sometimes they do the moves way better than
mhm.
when they had their sight. It's
Right.
pretty incredible.
Yeah. I took an improv acting class once. I took an acting class, and then the teacher recommended I take an improv class. And I thought improv is going to be about how to be funny, but it
Mm,
was about how to improvise on stage with other actors in the moment. And we did a lot of exercises with blindfolds on.
mm.
We did a lot of very, very interesting exercises to kind of play off each other's energy and each other's voices and have to move around and trust this and kind of feel each other and kind of touch the other people in the room. And it was really, really, I want to say eye opening, but it was eye closing.
Mm.
It was other sense opening.
Yeah, yeah. And it's also a lot of times when we take away a sense, even sound, right? It really heightens the other ones, but then also I think understanding really plays a big factor because it's very interesting because and I know how we all learn differently, through sight, hearing, and
Mhm.
feel. And when you take away that sight sound and you give them instructions that they would have been able to handle anyway, now all of a sudden they don't know which is their left foot, they don't know which is their
Mhm.
right foot.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's very interesting when we do things like that. And I'm wondering how that works with NLP because it's the words that guide us, right?
Right, right. If you pay close attention to how people talk and describe things in NLP, there's the idea we use our kind of preferred rep system or representational system. Some people describe things in pictures. I see what you're saying.
Mhm,
Some people describe things through kind of kinesthetic feelings, like I get what you're saying. Some people describe things through their auditory. I hear what you're saying. And
mhm,
the idea is that to be a better communicator, you pay close attention to the preferred rep system of other people. And I think about 60-70% of people prefer the sight-based kind of ideas where they kind of see pictures. And there's people that kind of have more of a feeling thing, and people have more of a kind of a hearing thing. I don't think a lot of people have a taste sensation. Oh yeah, I taste what you're saying.
no, right.
But but if you can kind of structure your language in the preferred rep system of the person you're talking to, that'll just be another way to another channel through which you can create deeper rapport with somebody.
Mm, mm. Yeah, without a doubt. I think communication is definitely something that we can all use help with, right?
Oh,
And
absolutely, absolutely.
a lot of us think that, hey, I got it. I know the language, or I can speak it, or been to college. I know how to communicate.
Mm,
Meanwhile, hands, right? Gestures,
mhm,
facial
mhm,
expressions, like you said, reading somebody,
mhm.
their
Yeah,
body language, all these different things. I think they truly play a huge part in even understanding a person because they may say something, but they actually meant something else, right?
right. There is a class of linguistic structures called linguistic presuppositions that are part of what is also called a Milton model, which was reverse engineered from a guy named Milton Erickson, who essentially he was a therapist and a doctor, and he invented a whole form of hypnosis, conversational hypnosis. But
Mm,
linguistic presuppositions are where you make a sentence and you kind of hide an idea inside the sentence. And these are almost always used negatively. The
mm,
most famous is the gotcha question: when did you stop beating your wife? The question presupposes that there was a time that the guy beat his wife.
right.
And these are the kind that TV interviewers love to drop on their guests to make them look bad. But there's I think 20 or 25 specific linguistic structures that are under the umbrella of linguistic presuppositions. And I
Mm,
spent maybe at least 5 years writing these out over and over again. After I would
really?
get off work in Japan, I would go to a coffee shop, I get a notebook, and I would just write out these language structures. And
Mm,
what that did to me is I didn't even anticipate this. What I could tell when other people were talking, the ideas that they believed, but they didn't want to be conscious about those ideas. And I'm not going to lie, it was not a very comfortable feeling because I was around these people I thought were cool people, but by listening to the structure of their language and the linguistic presuppositions they were putting in their language, it was like that movie, I think it's called They Live, back in the 80s. And and the movie was half the people in the world are aliens, and you can only see them if you put on these special glasses and see the
mhm,
aliens. It was kind of like that. I
wow,
could tell what was going on in people's brains just by how the structure of their language was.
mm. It's almost like you fully saw them then,
Yeah, yeah. Not
right?
fully saw them, but saw them on a little bit of a deeper level. Those
A
still kind
deeper
of
level, yeah.
a cajillion different onion layers on the inside, but it was kind of disconcerting at first because it was like, now it's no longer ignorance is bliss. Now I see the ugly truth of everybody. But then on the
Mm,
flip side of that, you can use linguistic presuppositions to slide positive ideas out there, to make
mm,
positive presuppositions about other people, to
mm.
make them feel good about themselves. So it's kind of
Nice.
a double-edged sword. And like you said, I think I fully believe that communication is a meta skill, one of the few meta skills that can make every other skill better.
Mm,
And it's a meta skill that has zero upper limit. You can practice language, you can practice communication, you can practice understanding human nature till the day you'll die, and you never, never, never top out. You'll
mm.
never get to the point where you say, "Oh, I got this. I can understand it now." You can always learn more.
Yeah, agreed. 1,000%. George, thank you so much for this conversation today, and I truly appreciate you. I know our time has come to an end, but what an incredible conversation. What an incredible human being you are. The
Thank you.
fact that your curiosity has taken you so far, and the fact that you've written so many books, I'm sure every time you write something, it sparks what's next, right?
Yeah, yeah. Every book that I've written has been a discovery inside my own brain of all this stuff that I didn't think I could think about.
Mhm. Yeah. I journal a lot so that I get what you're talking about because I'm a crazy journaler. I'll journal, I'll scratch something, and then I'll take that and I'll transcribe it to another book, and then I'll highlight the important aspects and
Mhm,
take it to another book, and then I'll put in a fourth book, sometimes even a fifth book. And I'm like, I like this, but man, I got to take this from it.
mhm,
So that really, I think journaling and like you talked about the blogs really help you kind of understand yourself, don't they?
mhm. Absolutely,
Mm,
absolutely,
yeah, yeah. Well,
absolutely.
great stuff today. Thank you, my friend. I
Yeah,
really appreciate you being here with me today. Do me a favor, hang on for a second. We're going to say goodbye to everybody. And
yeah.
I want to invite you to my other shows too. I think we're going to have a blast.
All
All right,
right,
everybody. Thank you. George, have an exceptional day, my friend. And everybody, make sure you come back and check us out again.
all right. Thanks for having me, Sifu. Great conversation.
Thank
Loved
you,
it.
buddy. Yep, likewise.